Hi, everyone. As you can see by the way that we've set this up, this is designed to be a conversation, an interactive discussion, a debate, maybe even. And we're going to try to go through a lot of stuff and move quickly. We have a number of the world's top experts on this subject. There's a lot of things happening also that we all need to get on the same page on in order to have a productive conversation. So to that end, the first part of our presentation is going to be Rafa, who's going to share, and I'll spare introductions because you guys already know who folks are, is going to give the introduction to the Neuro Rights Foundation, our recent activities, things that are happening in the field, its history, its present, and where we're going. I'll fill in some of the gaps after that and put maybe in a little bit of a broader context. And then Karen's going to help lead us in an interactive conversation. We know that we've already encouraged a number of you to say things and to offer. So be prepared to talk. We'll go for about maybe 12, 15 minutes. We'll see something like that as quick as we can. And then we'll get into the interactive part of the conversation. Does that sound? That sounds good. Terrific. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Rafa.
Thank you. This all starts with 10 years ago when I had like an Oppenheimer moment. So I'm a researcher. I was trained in medicine, but I've done fundamental research in neuroscience my whole life. And my goal, my dream is to understand how the brain works. And to do that, what we need to do as scientists is to break the code that the brain is using internally. My mentor, Sidney Brenner, actually is the person who deciphered the genetic code. And he used to tell us that biology is always an exercise in cryptography. We just have to figure out what is the code of the brain. And 10 years ago, we were exploring the hypothesis that the way that brain circuits communicate are with groups of neurons firing together. And this is what we call a neuronal ensemble. As opposed to individual neurons doing their thing, neurons fire together in groups. So we built neurotechnology using lasers, femtosecond lasers and holographic devices to map these neuronal ensembles in mice and to activate them and inactivate them. And what we found out was that we could decipher, we were studying visual perception because the visual cortex is sort of the easy entry into the cerebral cortex for a scientist. And we figure out that we could decipher what the mouse is seeing by mapping these ensembles, but more importantly, that we can manipulate what the mouse is seeing by turning on and off the ensembles, to the point that we turn the mice into puppets. We can make the mouse do one thing or the other thing if we activate one ensemble or the other ensemble. And this is an experiment that was replicated in other labs in London and Stanford. And for us, it was fantastic because it showed us that, hey, we're inside, we got in. We now can actually start going to town, reading out these ensembles through the brain and systematically deciphering the neural code. So for a scientist and as a medic, this is also fantastic because you can get into the brain diseases that have problems with ensemble. But the reason I had this Oppenheimer moment is because what you can do in a mouse today, you can do in a human tomorrow. It's just a matter of time. It will happen. So if we can break the code and manipulate the ensembles and make the mouse see something or remember something that he's never experienced by turning on these ensembles, this is technically possible. Just like the Oppenheimer crowd, which also came from Columbia, they built the first atomic reactor, the Manhattan Project. That's why it's called Manhattan, started here. And the same people that built the reactor were the first people to worry about the consequences of atomic energy in humanity. So I started feeling the heavy weight in my shoulder, like, guys, you're building this tool, you're doing this experiment. Now how about worrying about what's coming? And we called in a meeting in 2017 at Columbia in the Morningside campus of a group of 25 experts, and we call ourselves the Morningside Group. And these are people that came from different countries representing the brain initiatives from the US, Europe, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, Canada, and Israel. These were people that were also representing patient collectives, people that were experts in neurotechnology like us that were building these tools, people coming from the industry. We had someone from Kernel, actually, in the early days, people coming from Silicon Valley, from AI. The head of AI at Google was part of the group. And we hold ourselves together to study the ethical and societal consequences of neurotechnology. And we came to the unanimous conclusion that this is a human rights issue. This is not another technology down the block. No, no, no. This is the technology that for the first time enables people, humans, to get into the brain, decoded and manipulated. And this, again, this is not science fiction. We've already done it 10 years ago in animals. So, and the brain, as you know, is not just another organ of the body. It happens to be the organ that generates the human mind. So, by definition, if you can read and change brain activity, you can read and change mental activity. And that's why we came up with the concept of neuro rights as a series of human right level protection for 5 areas of concern where the application of neurotechnology could lead to serious ethical and societal consequences. The application of unregulated neurotechnology, I would say. And the first neuro right is the right to our own mental privacy, so that the contents of our brain activity cannot be decoded without our consent. The second is the right to our own mental identity, our self, our consciousness, our personality, so that that cannot be altered without our consent. And again, I'm not talking science fiction. This has happened. No? I can tell you later if you want, no clinical cases. The third one is the right to our own free will, our liberty, our decision-making, so that just like we turn the mice into puppets, this cannot be done in humans. It should be a fundamental human right to keep our decision-making as a fundamental property of the person. And the last 2 neuro rights is the right of equal access to neuro augmentation, because we think it's inevitable, it will happen, that humans will use neurotechnology to enhance our mental and cognitive abilities. And we want to start the discussion now to ensure that this is ushered in under the universal principle of justice. The last neuro right has to do with the right to protection from bias on the information that neurotechnology can introduce into the brain, like what we do with mice, because one of the side discoveries of our mouse experiment was that the mouse interprets all the information that we put in as internal. So when we put in an image, it does not interpret that as something that he sees in the outside, no, something that he thinks this is the way the world is. No? So any information that goes into the brain has a much higher level of concern with respect to bias and discrimination. So this was the Neuro Rights Agenda. We published it in a joint paper with 25 authors in the journal Nature to alert our colleagues and alert society in 2017. And since then, a little bit with the weight of the responsibility of the kid that builds the devices, I spent a lot of my time, maybe almost half of my time, devoted to the promotion of neuro rights. No? So we built a foundation with Jamie and with a third wheel, who's not here today, Jared Genser, who's an international human rights lawyer, because for this business, you don't need academic. You need people that really know the law, particularly human rights. And we built this Neuro Rights Foundation. We don't get paid to do this. So this is completely pro bono non-profit. And I spend sometimes half of my time on this, which gets people in my lab a little worried, like, shouldn't you be doing experiments, Yuste? And our foundation does 3 things. We do research on neuro rights, and we've done a few reports, but I highlight one that's particularly important today. A month ago, we released a report of the consumer user agreements of 30 neurotechnology companies that are doing consumer neurotechnology, not clinical, but consumer-based. No? And we found great deficiencies out of the 30 companies that we studied. 30 out of 30 took possession of all the brain data of the consumer. And most of the companies also allow themselves to sell the data to third parties. The way we put it, neural data could not be less protected than it is. So we have a problem, and we want to solve this problem, and hopefully get your feedback and support to solve that problem. So this is in terms of our research. We also do advocacy. So we've been working with different countries, with different states and different international organizations. So we sponsored and helped write the constitutional amendment in Chile that amended Article 19 of the Chilean Constitution. And that was passed unanimously by the Chilean Senate, the Chilean House of Representatives, and signed by President Piñera almost 3 years ago. And that amendment is a brief sentence that protects brain activity and the information that comes from it, and applies to all the Chilean citizens. So Chile was the pioneer in this, and the reason it was Chile is because we got involved with Chile. We were invited to do this there. And as you heard from Karen, that amendment has led to the first jurisprudence case in the world, where the Chilean Supreme Court 9 months ago unanimously ruled that this citizen that had sued an American neurotech company for infringement of his basic human rights was correct, and they forced the company to delete the data that they had of the citizen and to subject themselves to inspection. So besides Chile, we've also fostered and sponsored a similar constitutional amendment in the state of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil. So this is a small state, the one that was just almost ruined by the flooding recently. So this state is a really interesting state. They're very progressive. And we came to talk to the governor and the vice governor, and they took it to heart. And the Parliament of Rio Grande unanimously approved a similar constitutional amendment to their state constitution, like the Chilean case. And this is a state in which they had 16 different political parties represented in the parliament. And this is the only time in history they've all agreed. So we got unanimous agreement in Chile. Chile is also a very polarized society and political system. Same in Rio Grande in Brazil. And then I have good news to bring you. In the US, we've been working now for almost a year in Colorado with a hand on hand with the Colorado Medical Association, who is represented by Sean Posaski here as a neurologist from Colorado. And together we sponsored this bill of neurodata in Colorado that defines for the first time legally what is neurotechnology, what is neural data, and applies to it the Colorado Data Protection Law Act, actually, which is one of the few in the US, and essentially categorizes neural data as personal sensitive data. And this Colorado bill, again, was unanimously approved by the House and the Senate in Colorado and signed by Governor Polis a month ago, and Sean and I were there. The signature. It was a historic moment because it was the first bill in the world. I mean, the Chilean and Brazilian bill, they're not really bills, they're actually constitutional amendments, but they're very high level. No, constitutional amendment, it depends on the judges to interpret that. No, what we need is really precision, legal precision. And that Colorado led the way here. And just very, very quickly bringing you good news from California, where our foundation has sponsored a bill, the Neuro Rights Bill, that has been introduced in the California Senate by Senator Josh Becker, who's actually representing Silicon Valley. So he's really from the heart of the tech industry. And this bill was approved unanimously last week by the Senate of California, 38-0, okay? So Republicans and Democrats. And this bill does something very similar to Colorado. It defines first what is neural data, what is neurotechnology, and then applies to it the CCPA, the California Consumer Data Protection Act, which for those of you in the business is the strongest data privacy legislation in the world after European GDPR. So this bill from California is now going into the chamber. They're probably will be there in a couple of weeks testifying again, but hopefully things will go well, and California could become the second state in the country where there's protection for brain data as considered to be personally sensitive data. So if you live in Chile, Rio Grande do Sul, Colorado, California, I would say you don't have to worry about your mental privacy. You can worry about other things, but not about that. No? And it's just by chance that tomorrow they'll call us to the White House. We're going there for the second time to discuss this issue. And also we're going to have a couple of meetings of the Senate because unfortunately, the US is probably the only major country in the world that does not have a national data privacy legislation. And so different states are, of course, there are 16 states that have, or 12, I think, that have promoted their own, but the logical solution is to have a nationwide Data Protection Act. And we're trying to argue that it's very important to include neural data as part of the sensitive data that needs to be protected. And just to finish that, I told you our foundation is doing research, we're doing advocacy. We're also involved in outreach, in getting this message to the public. No, I mean, it's great to talk among ourselves, but no, this is something for the citizens to evaluate directly. I'm nobody to tell the people what to do. No, I'm just a scientist here. And part of our efforts for outreach, we made a movie with the documentary with the German director Werner Herzog. The movie is called The Theater of Thought. And it's a documentary in which we go shooting interviews of 30 experts in neurotechnology, including Paulina, who's one of our stars in the movie. She's closing up the movie. It's an hour and 45 minutes. And although you cannot yet stream this movie in the services, they haven't been able to sell it yet to a company, but we've been given permission by Werner to organize private screenings at no cost for any organization that's involved in neurotechnology or scientific, medical, or NGO. So if any of your companies or your organizations interested in watching that movie, please email us and we will make it happen so you can have a screening pass for the movie. And with that, I'll finish maybe with a couple of asks for you. No? One is give us feedback in terms of how do you think neurotechnology should be regulated. This is the perfect time to give us feedback since we're going to the White House tomorrow and the Senate. And also the second thing, we have a little bit of an agenda coming to this meeting. After our consumer user agreement report, we want to work with companies to do a pilot agreements that can be used as examples for the whole industry. And these pilot agreements, we have the seal of approval of our foundation, like we think this is good, this is sufficient, and of course be sponsored by a company. And this could go a long way because, as I'm telling you, the situation today is just not okay. You know, the private consumer user agreements of all the companies that we studied are deficient in a big way. So these are my two asks for you: feedback for our agenda, particularly with respect to DC, and also think about if you're interested in working together with us to write the pilot agreement. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rafa. We're a little over 15 minutes, so I'm going to go maybe a minute right now, and then we're going to open it up so we can have a conversation. First part is the effort so far in law and in public understanding and obviously in industry practice, sort of the areas that we're working on, was really not a matter of choosing either or. So the legislation that's already been passed is focused on consumer neurotechnology. It has a particular set of definitions. We know that part of the broader conversation has been all of the other cognitive markers and ways of measurement. So this is not a choice of either or between these things, but it's really more of 0 to 1. And our view was it was important to move from 0 to 1 to begin to engage with policymakers, the public, and with the industry, and to move towards action. And so that leads to my second comment, is that one of the things I'm so excited about with Brain Mind, and that it's really catalyzing, is a movement. In my own background and career, I worked for the chairman of the FCC in the 90s when we were implementing the Telecom Act, and all hell was breaking loose with the internet. So I've seen a technological revolution from the inside as a policymaker. In that chair, I was in Silicon Valley as an entrepreneur and venture capitalist. I also started a company with Al Gore, kind of when he was uncool Al, like in 2002, after, back then, when he was putting together a slide deck that became an inconvenient truth. And I started a company that was a TV network called Current TV with him. So I've seen the climate movement also. And so I want you to think in your mind as we're having this conversation, what is a movement? We've heard that word. That was my JP word when he did his poem, or one-word poem was movement in my head. And what makes for a successful movement? Because this is poised to be a successful movement. And that's what's impacted there, is the sense of what is, well, not just the problem, but what is possible. And what Rafa and all of you understand is that the circle of possibility is extended, which allow us now to imagine and to convey to the public, to policymakers and others, that the possibility that what we can afford to care about and what we can afford to act on are much bigger. And so final point is that key part in this conversation is going to be speaking to key stakeholder groups with more of a coherent voice, a story that they can understand. One of them is institutional capital. This movement needs, we've heard this again and again, institutional capital to move into that space. Institutional capital doesn't like risk, right? And so regulatory risks, lack of public trust, lack of coordination among partners, et cetera, seems risky. So we need to have fierce and open dialogue within this to try to get things right. But we also need to be clear about how we're communicating to the stakeholder groups, institutional capital being one. Second, being policymakers, that's what we're intending to do. Third, being the public, right? We all have a common interest, right, in communicating to the public to give them a sense of trust around that. And there's other stakeholder groups. So I want you to hold that in mind as we're having the conversation here, that we're poised to build a much bigger and exciting movement, and that this, what the NeuroRights Foundation, Karen, and so many other people are doing, is building this essential building block that begins to lock in that story for those different stakeholder groups that allow more energy, more capital, more talent to come into the space in order to be able to grow. So with that, Karen, unless you want to give some anything framing, and now we really want to hear from all of you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction, that history, and the invitation for questions. I think at this point we have this real opportunity to get feedback from the group, and we've talked to a couple of you and asked you if you might kick us off. But I also want to set the stage for a conversation where I'm going to set some ground rules, if I may. And so the first one is to just come into this with a kind of openness that everybody is right, but probably only partially right. So you probably only part of the story. Also respect that we've got a lot of great thinkers here that ideate at a different amount of time. So perhaps you have a lot of things you want to say at once, but maybe someone takes a little bit longer to say something. So let's let people who haven't had a chance to speak also get to speak if you have already spoken. And I think also the final thing I'll say is just understand that, as Jamie and Rafa have also said, that we have a shared vision of wanting to make sure there's a future of ethical technology for everyone. So try to understand that, or be open to the idea that people's ideas are offered in the spirit of what's best for society, even if it may not sound like it initially. So does that sound like okay ground rules for you? Okay, great. Okay, I'd actually like to start with, I think you're so right. There have been so many perspectives moving this place, and all of them are important. You need the policymakers, you need the public, you need a coherent voice. I'm wondering if we could invite a legal scholar and lawyer in this space. I know you all have one, but just from another perspective, focusing on privacy. Amanda Postilnik, if you'd introduce yourself and share a little bit of your thoughts on what. On this movement, I suppose.
Okay, thanks. So first of all, I completely share your goals and so grateful for your leadership on this. I think every single one of us understands the importance in a very visceral way of what you're talking about. And when we talk about privacy, though, as we've seen with the internet, it's a very unreliable microphone, but I'm loud, so I haven't spent a career lecturing for nothing. Thank you. Use my courtroom voice. It reminds me a little sometimes of The Princess Bride, where Inigo Montoya says to Vicini, "You keep using that word. I don't think it don't mean what you think it means." Privacy can mean a lot of things, and consent can also mean a lot of things. And in American law, we tend to fall back on privacy and consent without necessarily having them protect what we want them to protect all the time. So, for example, a data privacy law that allows us to consent to the use of our biometric data, which all of our laws do now, including the new Colorado law. Your data can be used with your consent, might not protect it at all, because if your employer says, "Do you like your job?" and you say yes, and they say, "Okay, so can we have your brain data?" It's going to be hard for you to not also say yes. And consent can be illusory. And if consent is illusory, where there are big power differentials and status differentials and economic incentives, then privacy, if privacy rests on consent, then that can go away. On the other hand, not all data necessarily needs maximum protection. Our brains do so much, and there are so many different social contexts in which that brain data might be used. Maybe we would want me to be able to consent for my brain data to be used by a brilliant researcher like Lee and his research program, or for the company that has a BCI to improve their own technology internally. But I wouldn't want to have consent be the mechanism that protects my brain data if the government is getting a Fourth Amendment search warrant for my brain data, or if my employer is asking me to consent to certain kinds of monitoring. So I'm hoping that as the initiative matures, that sort of like every field recommends themselves as experts, but that more lawyers, everything needs more lawyers, get involved to help really refine what privacy interests are at stake, how to isolate them with care, and then how to accord the right level of protection both to different kinds of personal data and legal and social interests, which you're making a start on. And the last thing I'm going to say, because there's so many good thoughts here, is sometimes in law, the first mover is the only mover, because lawmakers have so much to deal with and such limited attention spans that while there is a real risk in waiting and letting the market get away from you, there's also a lot to be said about putting a stake in the ground first that defines the kinds of interests, because lawmaking is not very iterative, and what you get first often is what really lasts. So we're actually at a pretty critical period right now that you guys are driving, and so we need to take you and what you're doing really seriously. Thanks.
So we'll go ahead and go through a few comments. And yes, go ahead, Steve.
Jamie and I met at BrainMind at UCFF, so fantastic opportunity. Very briefly, I did my doctoral dissertation on how to update the law regarding undue influence. And I used Chinese communist brainwashing models, and then I connected it to trafficking law, which is fraud, force, or coercion. I added a law professor, Alan Shefflin's social influence model that experts can explain, the influencee, the influencer, and then the influences. And I did the first quantitative study, scientifically validated construct for evaluating undue influence, which I call the BITE model: behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And it fits on an influence continuum from ethical influence to unethical influence. And lastly, I'll just say that ISIS and other extremist cults are recruiting on the internet. They're using private data that they're buying from companies like Glue, which is in Colorado. And I've heard now of the first VR usage of a cult to recruit and indoctrinate people. Lastly, I'll say, do you remember the sarin gas cult in Japan, Om Shinrikyo? They had the first computer video game to recruit and indoctrinate people in the world that I'm aware of. So my expertise of 48 years, I'm really about human rights and what we need to do to protect everybody. So thanks for listening.
Thanks for your work, Stephen. I wonder if we could also have, so we heard from Amanda, but I wonder if we could also hear from some of our academic researchers in this space. So maybe Lee and Polina, you could add, what is your take on this movement in this direction? What would you advise?
Sure. I can start with, and my perspective would be from an engineering standpoint. So as we develop tools, we need to have a very good and rigorous way to evaluate those tools to really understand what type of data those tools actually produce and generate and how to interpret that type of data. So if I didn't, let's say if somebody develops a tool and they only sort of partially characterize it, that tool might be used in a way that the original creator did not intend to do so, which that it may be. So being rigorous and understanding everything that you're extracting from your tools, but also having good control of your tools is important, and that's why we need to kind of always keep the ethics in mind. And there are some tools are, might have an actual physical switch in them, so it's pretty difficult to run an electrical tool without voltage. However, there are tools, including some of the tools that are developed by people like myself and others who work more in the chemical space, that might not have an obvious on-off switch. And there, understanding the technology and understanding what would constitute such on-off switch, how can we have that control of that data, or how we can control of that tool so that we can turn it off when we need to, or we can give control people of their data, or we can give people an option to get rid of it when they want to. It's very important. So this work needs to, of course, incorporate designers so that we can be informed from early on, so that when we develop those technologies, all of these ideas are incorporated de novo, so that we are not trying to then patch something that was potentially developed incompletely or sloppily. So that we do a good job right away. So I'll pass it to Lee.
So I'll reiterate one of Polina's comments in just a moment, but first I'll begin with a confession, which is that I was a junior ethicist before I was a junior researcher. As a high school student, I wasn't reading about neuroscience, I was reading the Hastings Report, which is which is, I think it started in about 1971 as a journal of ethics that I highly recommend. Super, yes. And kind of with that in mind, when we started the BrainGate research 20 years ago, I had very much in my mind that we need to be super aware of the potential ethical and content import of the data that we were going to be recording for the first time. And that continues to be true today, in that from people, we're recording the highest bandwidth intracortical data that are available, which means that sitting on the equivalent of a hard drive in the lab right now is the world's largest source of high-resolution chronic intracortical brain data. And first, I want to just commend the work that's being done, because I am 100% on board that the privacy, the ownership, if you will, it's not used in a legal term, so Amanda's going to smack me upside the head in a moment, but at least broadly speaking, the ownership and the privacy of those data should, in my view, remain that of the person who generated them, which just means the person whose brain that is. So couldn't agree more. Where I see a challenge coming up, and it's exactly what Polina just referred to, is that we don't know what are in those data. We're recording in our particular clinical study the decoding of an attempted movement or intended speech. But it has to be true that those same neural activities could also identify what neuroactive medicines that person is taking. If it's not true, those neuroactive medicines aren't neuroactive. It has to be somewhat true, even though the sample may be sparse, that it is a sparse example of that person's mood, even though what we're actually decoding at the moment is whether the cursor should be moving to the right or to the left. We can get a little bit further out on an edge or a ledge about what is lurking inside those neural data, not in any kind of malevolent way, but we just don't know how to extract everything that is in those neural data, and I'm sure that 5 years from now, we will know more than we do today about what was back there. And so for me, from a research standpoint, when we have those data, first, they're owned and operated, so to speak, first and most importantly by the people who generated them, the participants are in a clinical trial. There is a very wise interest in sharing neural data from a research standpoint. The prima facie responsibility is that those are still the data of the person who generated them, the participant in the trial, until they provide consent to share them. And the consent needs to be explicit. And what I don't know right now is how to consent somebody to share data that I can't describe the content of. I can tell what I think's in the data. I have no idea how to describe what might be in the data that somebody else might discover, that we might figure out in a few years. And that is a really important challenge because and this is exactly what Pauline is referring to, we'll be able to develop better diagnostic and therapeutic devices if these data are shared. We need to trust who they're being shared with. We need to be sure that the people who generated the data, whose brain data these are, have given us permission to share those data, and that those data are only shared if everybody understands a risk that I can't actually completely describe. And so I'm hoping that through these efforts, we can begin to find the language that we can share across, whether it be consumer consent or research consent, for what are not lurking, but what are actually in these data that we'll discover at some point in the future.
Hi, everyone. Super quickly, I asked Diana if you can share a quick announcement. So United Nations and UNESCO several months ago picked up 24 specialists from all around the world, so beyond G7, G20 countries, so 193 countries are represented, to come up with a draft for the neuroethics document, act to be voted into law, suggestion for all the countries to follow and adopt in the legislation in the 43rd General Conference next year. And like a lot of examples that we mentioned, for example, drivers. So representatives are really all across the globe, all countries are represented, because challenges, as you can imagine, are very different and needs are very different from between US and Italy and France and Zimbabwe, literally. And the idea is effectively consent. We have lawyers, we have neurosurgeons, we have researchers, we have artists, we have philosophers there. Definitions of neural data, effectively chemicals, all type of actually, different modalities, even the ones that are maybe not yet fully represented, including organoids and animals. Animals are not forgotten in the document, but effectively covering examples of incarceration, economy, labor. You're right not only to access the data if your job will require you to wear the device, but also understand and give you ample opportunity to understand what those metrics are before they fire you because you are not performing well enough. So all of those are transcribed as a document. It will be shared publicly next week. And that's why I'm like jeopardizing 2 more minutes of your time, because I think this is a community, and obviously spread the word. Everyone can, you do not need to be like have an affiliation to participate, to give your feedback. All the feedback will be taken into consideration. In US, I'm at MIT, will be leading this. It will be online, so anyone can connect. There will be, I believe, one in Duke. I'm trying to organize one in California. And they will be all online. All of them will be online, so everyone is please come on in. This will be all transcribed anonymously, of course. So all of the document is 35 pages. If you hate it all, tell us you had it all, where we missed it, where we forgot. We tried to cover much more than obviously we already learned from amazing documents. OECD, we have folks also from there. We'll try to learn as the best and expand effectively understanding. Also, we have this chapter, that's why I decided to jump on here, of even if your data is there, you consented, but now we learned something. So what will happen? So yeah, sorry to jeopardize, but just thought it might be the most relevant of the current efforts that everyone present here can participate. And find me if you want like a follow-up, and it will be all public, accessible in multiple languages, of course, next week on the websites.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I think maybe we have a few more people we wanted to hear from, but do you want to pause here? Did you have any comment back that you wanted to share at this point?
Yeah, maybe just on the comment of UNESCO. So this is, of course, something that should be applauded, but we've had ethical guidelines for over 10 years now. In fact, we published our neuro rights agenda already almost a decade ago, and I think the ball has moved now to landing this concept in which everyone agrees upon. I still haven't met anyone who disagrees with ethical guidelines for neurotechnology. So the challenge is now just to land them into the legislation, regulation, constitutional amendment, because otherwise it's just we're going to repeat the mistakes that were made with other technologies. This is not the first time we go around the block here, no? And I don't have to mention, but we have a very poor track record as humans regulating technology that could have negative consequences, no? Particularly in the digital world.
I just want to note that Ariel and Steve are in the queue. Okay, so Jamie?
I would love to hear from one of the people who represent the companies.
Okay, so then Ariel and Steve, that's just what you're looking for then.
Hey there, I'm Ariel, one of the founders of Muse, probably one of the most visible neurotechnologies out there. We have 500,000 muses out in the wild. This is a question that has really, that I've been struggling with for a very long time. In 2010, I would lie awake at night thinking, oh my God, what are we doing? Are we unleashing the devil? Is the government going to be able to read your mind and use that information to sell you crap you don't need? And so in 2012, I started laying the groundwork for an organization that started in 2014, the Center for Responsible Brainwave Technologies. At that time, we had Anne Kavukian, the leader for Privacy by Design, Nita Fahrenheit, Brian Bellendorf from the Electronic Freedom Foundation, trying to bring people together to understand how we create a set of standards around privacy, safety, efficacy, transparency, and the most important one for me, agency. I think agency we talk about privacy a lot, but I think even more important than privacy is that these technologies should never erode human agency. As a consumer technology in this space, we are aware of the vulnerabilities that are being created by these technologies. And we very greatly appreciate guidance, both for ourselves and for the other companies. We tried to have summits where we brought together all of the leaders in the space, came up with a white paper. How many people actually adopt these things? I don't know. We dreamed of an agency that would be like a certifying body and would create ruckus when people were misbehaving, which I've noticed you started to do. Thank you. And so, I'm open to field any questions that you have about not necessarily the broad industry perspective, but our industry perspective. And it definitely is a challenge because, we work very closely with thousands of researchers and want to be able to share data with them out of which we can generate phenomenal insights. And we also need to make sure that we're always managing brain data appropriately. We've seen people go into neuromarketing with our technology, and we very much say, no, you are not allowed to use this device for neuromarketing. And we try to hold down our SDK so that we can manage the applications that people build on it. But you can't really do that because then people write patches to use the Muse for free, which is fine, except that who knows what the use case is. So welcome all questions. Feel free to ariel@interaxon.ca. We probably won't have time to chat today, but please direct anything that you want towards me. I'm here.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Ariel.
Hello, I'm Steve Gollins. I'm on the front line of this, and we were just on a panel. I was on a panel with Karen. I think people were shocked because I'm now representing a company. I've been in academia at Harvard for 18 years. I was a venture capitalist. I've been on Wall Street. I've been on every side of the table here. I came out of retirement to take a brain-computer interface with a video game. It's called Think. which actually is helping kids do better at school. Very simply, behavior changes, lots of things. The struggle we're having, every single person on every team I've ever worked with has had the right motivation to do what they're doing. I have not seen that. But in all of those domains, I've always seen bad actors. You know, maybe I'll tweak my data a little bit so I can get that NIH grant or whatever it is. There's always bad actors. I live in a very pragmatic place right now. I understand the policies and everything else, but I have several companies reaching out to me, small companies and big, saying, let's do a collaboration together. I don't know whether to call their technology brain technology. Is this brain technology? It's monitoring the autonomic nervous system or not? And so the pragmatic event for me is we want to be good citizens, and I've been very clear with Karen about this, and follow the best rules. But in the NVCA, the National Venture Capital Association, about 15 years ago, got all the top attorneys in the country in that space to write pilot documents that are the signature documents that everybody now uses as a starting template. If I knew what my CDA should look like that I need to sign with somebody tomorrow, if I knew, because I'm not going to be able to go to an attorney who has a clue what's going on. Can I ship headsets to Colorado now? I have no idea what has to be in there, but having very specific outlines and guidelines so we don't spin our wheels wondering what's going on would be extremely helpful. And yeah, I know there's plenty of law firms who would love to be involved in something like this. I don't want to give their time away, but we're happy to help.
Yeah, so Steve, we're working for people like you, trying to make it easy for the companies that are mostly flying by the seat of their pants, the startups. They don't have the luxury of spending time and money and effort on these issues because they're still trying to get to whatever the next round. Yeah, the goal is essentially to provide, of course, free of cost to companies legal advice with some sample CDA pilots that have the seal of approval of our foundation and the people that will represent that. I'm telling you, this starts with a movement representing all the branches of the world, experts, the patients. So this is not just a couple of friends here. But this issue of what is brain data, is this brain data? This is exactly the discussions that we're having with the lawyers in Chile that we had already in Chile, in Brazil, in Colorado, in California, to nailing that legally, because it doesn't matter what we call it. What matters is what's in the law and how the law is interpreted by a judge. So just to give you some pointers, in Chile and Brazil and Colorado, brain data is defined as neurotechnology devices. I mean, I'm just rehashing here. Devices that measure directly the activity of the central or peripheral nervous system. So that little wristband, if it samples neural activity, that's neurotechnology. We have discussions with respect to control labs. There's actually a company that we have some ties, or not ties. We have no ties with any company, but some shared experiences with. I happened to have the Reardon as my undergraduate student a few years ago, and in this case, I mean, my hat off to them because they're brilliantly figure out they can use EMG to record motor units, but the motor units are actually from the spinal cord. This is classic central nervous system. So they would be included. I think if you have a device that gets to the motor units, whether it's directly or through the MEG, then at least our position is that should also be included. But if you have an Apple Watch, well, that obviously is not neurotechnology. That's other things, is biometric. I'm not saying that they're not important. There's a whole field that we're not touching on purpose because we want to be focused and effective to prevent endless discussions that will essentially lead to paralysis and lack of. That's the plan. That's the reason that Jamie, me, Sean are here for this meeting, because we want to make ties with companies to explore some pilot agreements. And the minute that we achieve that, they will make them, of course, public. No?
Okay.
I just wanted to turn this to you about your documents question.
Yeah. Well, one, yes, we also have documents that we created with BrainMind that we're happy to share with you related to a number of those instruments. But I think that the more people we have working on this, the better that will be, as long as we have the right expertise in place. And it sounds like that's what we're looking for at this point. So that's great. Thank you for that, Amanda. So Dan, I would like to let you go, Raghav also, and then note that we have about 10 minutes, and could like to just put seed out there that this is your opportunity to share with Jamie and Rafa some of your wish list items or some of your lingering questions or opportunities and ideas that you have. Okay, so Dan, Raghav, and Sean.
Yeah, I'll try to do it quick. So I'm working for InBrain. We're a company that makes medical devices. And I think it's very important. This is medical devices, brain interfaces, and we are a European company, so we are regulated by GDPR. So I would like to give to this audience a little bit of inspirational awareness of what GDPR is. And in GDPR, we don't make any difference between neural data, blood glucose level, or sex orientation, religion, or even social security number. All these data are considered personal data, and they cannot be sold. They have to be in servers in Europe. Every process, every signal processing or whatever processing, data processing on this data must be declared somewhere, and public needs to have access to this. And even if people give their consent, they cannot be sold. It's forbidden by law thanks to GDPR. And before getting into that domain, I was working for cochlear implants for the past 15 years, and cochlear implants are gathering some peripheral data. And we had no problem collecting this data, but it's like regulated. So I was wondering why within my company, we are going to collect brain data, but because we are a medical device company, then it's medical data. And with your consumer electronic device, it is no longer medical data. So what if the solution is not just consider brain data as medical data, as if it was a glucose level in the blood? What do you think?
So I have information that directly relevant to you. You're mixing two issues, medical or non-medical versus GDPR in Europe. Let me just tell you about the GDPR. Turns out that the GDPR committee has approached us already 2 years ago, because the GDPR was written 10, 15 years ago. There's no mention absolutely of neural data. You cannot blame them, no? And there is one word, biometrics, can you expand the meaning of biometrics to include neural data? Well, depends on the lawyers, depends on who you ask. It's unclear. Because of that, the same people that are behind the GDPR in Europe have asked us for help to see if we can use the GDPR to protect neural data. And it's extremely difficult. You cannot add a single word to the GDPR because it involves 34 countries. It's just impossible. But one thing that we're working with them is to expand the definition of certain articles in the GDPR. So this will not be legally binding, but it will be essentially a guideline for companies in the neurotech space. So they are working on a decalogue for neurotechnology that will show how the GDPR can be extended, even though it's not written, that the spirit goes in that direction.
GDPR gives a framework.
It's a good framework, but it's not enough. Again, they themselves are asking us for help with this. No? With respect to the medical issue, our position is that all neurotechnology that's medical has absolutely no problem, because it's already regulated by HIPAA, FDA in the US, equivalent laws in different countries, in different parts of the world. But there's some countries like Chile who said, okay, what if we turn the consumer neurotech into medical by law. And in fact, we also helped Chile with a bill of law, the Neuro Rights or Neuroprotection Bill, I think they call it, which was passed unanimously by the Senate, but it was actually blocked in the House by lobbyists from American tech companies, not neurotech, no, tech companies, using all kinds of arguments that were essentially flawed, but that was enough to block the bill. And what that bill tried to do was to essentially what you're saying, make all neurotechnology medical and apply to it the Chilean medical code and the equivalent of the FDA, which is called the Institute of Public Health. But I have to tell you, this is one of the battles we've lost now with the Chilean law, and it was due to the confusion created by lobbyists that unfortunately used some of the, I would say, dissent within the neuroethics community to block regulation. So I would say the neuroethicists should have been the first people 100% behind the bill. And because there were articles saying, oh, we don't need any neuro rights, we're fine, these lawyers use these articles, well, these lobbyists, I should nothing against lawyers, just the lobbyists use this article to create confusion, and that made the members of parliament in Chile, not the Senate, it was unanimous, the House, like, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe we should wait. This is exactly what they wanted to wait, and it's been waiting 3 years.
Okay, so Raghav, and I think I'll just add to that, it's really complex in the EU. We've been working in the Brussels ecosystem, and certainly that's kind of like the DC of Europe, right? And there are active investigations, including people who wrote the GDPR, starting to figure out, doing a deep dive analysis on what are ways this might fit. And it's further complicated by the product device regulation that has, designates some technologies as class 3 and others. So we can talk more about that later. But Raghav?
Yes. So hi everyone, I'm Raghav. I'm a computer scientist at Yale building processes for implanted interfaces. Now, we've been following your work, and thank you for that. One of the things that I find challenging is the interplay of ethics, legal, and social issues with hardware design. When we talk about implanting compute on the device, we get a new host of challenges. For example, the device, say, the data never has to leave the brain. It can be inside the person and be processing it. But the design decisions that, say, engineers like me make in building the system have an influence on what the device cannot do. Concrete example is we could all lobby for access to the data, but if the device that I designed currently doesn't have access to it, gets implanted, and the law changes, there is no way without surgery that we can replace that device. And what could also lead to, maybe it's okay or not, that different people may have different accesses or rights to their data. Those with earlier versions that do not have the device, that had an older generation, and the newer ones that do not. This was a problem, for example, with Microsoft coming up with a new OS and saying we don't have hardware that we support. It's going to be hugely problematic with humans. The other issue is when we are implanting the device, the functionality and the protection, these two are competing for resources like power and temperature, which affects patient safety. For example, a patient who's using processing to decode movement intent now has to spend some of that implanted energy and power on encrypting the data before sending it out. Which is the right way to do, and who has access to it, who has control over it? One, it has to be inbuilt into the device, otherwise it cannot be altered. And second, we don't know, but we have to make a call in building those features in the device. So it would be good to have regulatory policy and legal guidance on these things. One last thing is, which is a bit unusual, but it is also coming up these days, is the identity of the implant, which has sensing, processing, and stimulation capabilities. We don't have a lot of these devices today. Do you consider it as a prosthetic, as an independent agent, or as a cognitive assistant? Because if it's an independent agent, it can monitor, and if there are malicious acts that it observes, it has to report. If it's part of the individual's identity, then it shouldn't. And again, as a computer scientist, why it sort of concerns me is, for all of these, we need to build in support in the hardware and software. Software is a little easier to change. But if it goes into the hardware and we cannot change it, suddenly we end up in a situation with different people, different privileges, rights, and protocols. So these are some of the issues.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so I want to make sure our last two questions get in. So Sean and Emily, and did you have a question as well? Yeah, more like a comment. I'm a lawyer, but I can. Well, you can say a comment as well, and then we'll wrap it up there.
No, I can wait. I'd be happy to just wait. Okay, I'll be really quick.
Okay,
My name is Gina Lupino. I'm a lawyer, intellectual property lawyer, U.S. patent attorney. I'm also a person living with Parkinson's, and I had DBS surgery last March, a year ago. So I just wanted to comment that if you're going to speak to Congress this week, keep in mind, well, your comments were excellent because I think they really tie the issues back to the patient's wellness and how any changes in law could affect just a patient's day-to-day life and submitting to getting things replaced, hardware replaced, et cetera. And that could be very painful and cumbersome. Secondly, just any law that's written, laws are great, but you need to have remedies very clearly defined and very accessible to people. Otherwise, it's not really worth any more than the paper that they're written on. And I had another point lastly. I don't remember. I don't think this is important. Or compliance issues, just making scopes of data or definitions clear so that it's clear what overlaps with GDPR or HIPAA. And if there's more compliance work, it just gives more admin work passes them on to the techs, companies, and patients don't benefit, makes everything more expensive. So just if you're talking about this topic, just keep all these things in mind. Thanks.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sean, and we at Intheon have built a platform for processing neural data. So we don't generate data, but other companies or research labs use our platform for processing their data. And my question is about data in terms of research. So, you know, as is common, data sets are, you know, gathered and then they're used for one study and then they might be shared for some other study, and that could be, you know, very useful. And that data is and should be de-identified. But does that de-identified data still fall under these privacy guidelines, which I would also like to say I'm a very strong supporter of, but if they do, and that data is then, if patients or the originator of the data has the right to, let's say, delete the data, have the data deleted, well, if the data is de-identified properly, well, then there's no way to trace it back to that individual. That's the whole point of de-identification. So then that there creates a conflict there, and how do you resolve that conflict, right? Or does data, once it's de-identified, if there is no way to trace it back to the individual, then does it no longer fall under as being part of that individual's data? So it's kind of, I feel you have to kind of go if you go the route of, well, the user has to have the right to have their data deleted no matter where it went, then we need provenance, right, of that data, and then it's no longer de-identified. So there's this sort of conundrum there that I don't have a solution for, but I just have the questions. But yeah.
And then we can answer them.
Could I super quickly answer this, because we were discussing this exactly 10 years ago in the Morningside meeting with the person that invented federated learning as one way to solve that problem, and also the experts in cryptography. So there are technical solutions that could go a long way towards your concern, which is, of course, a very serious problem with the brain data. Let me first tell you, 50% of brain data, 50% of the variance of brain data is individual specific. Depends on which brain data you're talking about. But just to give you a number, about half of the brain data, you can pinpoint it to the person, like a fingerprint. So this is going to be a huge issue, what you just mentioned. But there are technical solutions that can go a long way. We proposed, it wasn't me, it was these people coming from Silicon Valley that knew this code, the blockchain, differential privacy, federated learning, homomorphic encryption. If you just apply these recipes, it can go a long way.
Okay, thank you for that, Emily.
I'll be quick. Gina stole my thunder, but it's such an important point that I'm going to say it again. Also an IP person, remedies. These conversations tend to focus a lot on the substance of the law, so we should have a right to privacy. Here's what it should look like. People tend to punt the process side to the lawyers. Where should this be enforced? What should the remedies be if a statute is violated? Don't punt it to the lawyers. If you look at intellectual property law, for example, the remedies for trade secret theft or patent infringement are either going to be money, as in damages, you pay money if you violate the terms and are found to have violated those terms, or injunction, as in we will shut down your business if you violate these terms. And we've seen the evolution of intellectual property law that as those remedies change, behavior changes dramatically. There was a Supreme Court case in 2006 that significantly curtailed the circumstances under which you can get an injunction for patent infringement, and it drastically changed the landscape of how much patent infringement exists. If you can pay lawyers to defend you for decades before you ever have to be held to task for what you've done, then the ROI is very different than if they shut down your business. So I encourage you not to overlook that as scientists and ethicists. You can participate in defining that. In fact, you have a lot of power in voluntarily saying, I would subject myself as an ethical scientist to the following types of remedies for this type of behavior. And where those laws get enforced makes an enormous difference in how much deterrent effect they're going to have on the population of bad actors that we know inevitably are going to participate in the system.
Thank you so much, Emily. Okay, so I think we have to wrap up, but thank you very much for your time and your curiosity and your advice. I'm sure that you both will be around during the break as well.
Can I just say one thing? I want to single out Diana. Thank you very much for helping to organize this, and thank you to BrainMind for all the work you're doing. This is such an important platform for us to be able to pull this together, and thank you, Karen. That's where I was going next. So one, we obviously very open door. Like Sean basically cold called us, and now he led the group. So we this is like a movement, right? We're building a community of, and so we want to work with people. So all of our doors are open. We're easy to find. You can get me on LinkedIn. I'll be very responsive. I'll give you email and all the rest. You can definitely talk to Sean also, but literally this movement's growing every day, both the broader movement and this very specific community in action, both in this country and around the world. So very excited that so many people participated in this conversation, and thank you again to BrainMind for making it happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And also very excited to have voices of those with lived experience and expertise add into the conversation who have really been missing. So I think that's really going to enrich where we're going next. So thank you everybody for your work. And again, thank you for your time. Thank you, BrainMind. Bye-bye.